There is a certain kind of quiet that settles over a home built on unspoken truths. It's not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy one, thick with the weight of things left unsaid. For the better part of a decade, that was the quiet of my relationship with Leo. Our lives had diverged onto two very different paths. While I found satisfaction in the steady, methodical work of building something from the ground up, away from the spotlight, Leo chased the spotlight itself. He was 32 years old, handsome, charismatic, and a rising star in the business development department at a tech firm called Innovatech Solutions. He was the sun, and I, it seemed, was the quiet planet forever in his orbit. The first tremor, the first sign that the ground beneath my feet was unstable, came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from my home office when a text message lit up my phone. It was from Leo. Rent's due. A bit short this month. Big bro. You know how it is. Isaihed. I did know how it is. It had been how it is for the better part of 3 years. I navigated to my banking app, my fingers moving in a familiar, almost robotic sequence. The joint account, our father's legacy, was there. I transferred the $500 he needed. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Leo. Got it. Not thank you. Not I owe you one. Just got it. I stared at the two words. A familiar. Dull ache settling in my chest. I told myself it didn't matter. He was just busy. Stressed from his high-pressure job. For the sake of our mother, who cherished the illusion of our perfect brotherly bond, I let it slide. I always let it slide. The second tremor was felt a few weeks later at our mother's 70th birthday dinner. It was a small affair. Just the three of us in her favorite Italian restaurant. Leo, ever the showman, was holding court, telling a story about a brilliant new marketing initiative he had pitched at work, and then it hit me. He said, his hands gesturing dramatically, "We've been targeting the wrong demographic. We don't need to chase the kids. We need to empower the professionals who are already using our product. A loyalty program built on professional development, not just discounts." My mother's eyes shone with pride. "Oh, Leo, that's wonderful. You're so clever." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. A cold sensation washed over me. It was my idea. Not just similar to my idea, it was, word for word, the exact concept I had brainstormed with him over the phone 2 weeks prior when he'd called, complaining about being creatively stuck. I looked across the table at him. My expression, unreadable. He caught my eye, and for a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of something in his not guilt, but a kind of defiant challenge. Then, he smiled, a brilliant, disarming smile, and gave me a subtle wink. "Learned from the best. Big bro," he said, raising his glass to me. The room was warm, filled with the scent of garlic and wine, but I suddenly felt ice cold. My mother was beaming, oblivious. To challenge him now would be to shatter her happiness, to turn her celebration into a bitter confrontation. So, I did what I always did. I raised my own glass, forced a smile, and let it slide. It was a small thing, a paper cut on the surface of our relationship. But even small cuts can fester when ignored. The final, earth-shattering tremor occurred on a rainy Thursday night. I had dropped by Leo's apartment to bring him some documents he needed to sign for our mother's estate. As I approached his door, I could hear his voice, loud and animated, through the thin wood. He was on a call. I paused, not wanting to interrupt. "No, the trip will seal the deal," Leo was saying, his voice brimming with excitement. "This is going to change everything. I just need the final investment to clear, and then it's a guaranteed promotion." A big score. My hand froze on the doorknob. Investment. What investment? He was always chasing some scheme. But the tone of his voice, this was different. Just as I was about to knock, he must have seen my shadow through the frosted glass. His voice dropped. "Hey, gotta go. I'll call you back." The door swung open, and he was standing there, a wide, almost predatory smile on his face. "Elias, what's up?" I told myself it was nothing, but a seed of profound unease had been planted. I had no idea then what a toxic tree it would grow into. Over the next 2 days, that seed sprouted, its roots twisting around my thoughts. The investment, the big score, the sudden need for a large sum of money, a cold dread began to pool in the pit of my stomach. I had to know. I had to be sure. It was then that I decided to conduct a test. A final, desperate attempt to prove my own paranoia wrong. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I called him. I told him a lie. I said a freelance contract had fallen through, that I was in a temporary bind, and that I needed to borrow a small amount from our joint savings account, just for a couple of weeks. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then he laughed. It wasn't a warm, brotherly laugh. It was a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement, laced with a pity that was more insulting than any anger could ever have been. It was the sound of a man who held all the cards, mocking the player who didn't even know he was in a game. "You," he scoffed, the amusement still dancing in his voice. "I'm sorry. Big bro. But you are a bad investment. I need that money for something much bigger." For a long time after the call ended, I just sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air of the dial tone. A bad investment. The words echoed in the profound silence of my apartment, each syllable a small, sharp stone striking the foundation of my world. It wasn't just the theft, it was the casual cruelty, the complete and utter dismissal of me. Not just as a brother, but as a human being. The laughter was the worst part. It was the sound of his victory and my foolishness. In that moment, the quiet, heavy air in my life didn't just feel like unspoken truths. It felt like a tomb, and I had just realized I was the only one being buried alive. But even then, and a part of me the stubborn, the hopeful part that had been making excuses for Leo my entire life, refused to surrender. It whispered that this was a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake fueled by ambition and stress. I had to try. I had to give him one last chance to be the brother I wanted him to be, not the one he was revealing himself to be. I called him back. He answered on the second ring, his voice impatient. "What?" "Elias." I kept my own voice level, fighting to keep the tremor out of it. "Leo, that money, that's not just our money. It's the emergency fund. It's for Mom if she ever needs it. It's what Dad wanted." "Oh, here we go." He sighed, the sound crackling with static and disdain. The what Dad wanted speech. Dad wanted us to be successful. Elias, not to sit on a pile of cash out of fear. You don't get it because you don't have any ambition. This is how the world works. You have to be bold. You have to invest in yourself. Invest in yourself. The words felt like ash in my mouth. By stealing from your family. I didn't steal anything, he shot back, his voice rising in manufactured indignation. It's my money, too, and I'm using it to build a future for this family. Something you're too scared to do. Honestly, you're just jealous. You're jealous that I'm going places and you're still stuck being a freelance consultant. Whatever the hell that even means. Dad would be ashamed of your lack of drive. Not my ambition. The line went dead again. This time, I put the phone down. The gaslighting was so complete, so shamelessly executed, that it left me breathless. He had twisted my concern into jealousy, my stability into fear, and my love into a weakness. The hopeful part of me finally went silent. It was time to stop hoping and start seeing. I thought that was the worst of it. That the betrayal was limited to his words and his theft. How naive I was. With a heavy heart, I opened my laptop. My hands, I noticed with a strange sense of detachment, were shaking slightly as I typed in the bank's web address. I navigated to the joint savings account page. My eyes fixed on the balance summary. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just low, it was empty. A perfect, soul-crushing zero. He had taken everything, every last cent, $74,000. Gone. I clicked on the transaction history, a cold dread spreading through my veins. There it was. A single, massive wire transfer made 2 days prior. The recipient was a holding company for a luxury resort in the Bahamas, the Serenity Cove Resort and Spa. The name was insignificant at the time, but it would soon become the stage for the final act of this tragedy. I recognized it immediately. It was the exclusive, invitation-only location where Innovatech was hosting its annual leadership retreat in 2 weeks. He hadn't just taken the money for some vague investment. He had a very specific, very expensive plan, the full weight of it all pressed down on me. And for the first time, I felt truly, utterly alone. The brother I knew, or thought I knew, was a phantom, a figment of my own desperate imagination. In his place was a stranger, a ruthless opportunist who saw family not as a bond, but as a resource to be exploited. And as I sat there, staring at the screen, a new email notification popped up in the corner of my vision. The subject line was simple, a private matter. The sender was a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a senior manager at Innovatech, a man in his late 50s who had been with the company since its early days. I knew him by reputation only a pillar of integrity. Fiercely loyal, and one of the few executives who had also been a close friend of my father's, I had never spoken to him directly. My secret ownership of Innovatech was a closely guarded fact, known only to the CEO and my legal team, to Marcus, and everyone else. I was just Leo's quiet, unassuming older brother. I opened the email. It was brief and formal. He wrote that he hoped he wasn't overstepping. But a matter of both personal and professional importance had come to his attention, one that concerned our family's legacy. He asked if I would be willing to meet him for coffee. We met the next morning at a small, anonymous cafe downtown. Marcus was exactly as I'd imagined, a calm, serious man with kind eyes that held a hint of sorrow. He spoke of his deep respect for my father, of the principles my father had built his life on. Your father was a man of his word. Elias. Marcus said, his voice low. His integrity was everything. That's why this is so difficult. He slid a slim, manila folder across the table. I think you need to see this. I opened it. My world tilted on its axis for the second time in 24 hours. Inside were not financial statements, but printouts. The first few pages were copies of anonymous complaints sent to the Human Resources Department, all targeting Marcus himself, questioning his competence and suggesting he was out of touch with the modern market. The writing was disguised, but the turn of phrase, the specific cadence of the insults, it was Leo. My blood ran cold. The next pages were printouts of internal project emails. I saw an idea from a young, Brilliant junior analyst, followed by an email from Leo a week later, presenting that same idea to senior management as his own. There were 3 different instances, 3 different employees, all their work co-opted and presented by my brother. It wasn't just ambition. It was a pattern of calculated, parasitic theft designed to tear others down so he could climb over their backs. As my eyes scanned the damning evidence, my mind flashed back to his voice on the phone, dripping with self-righteous indignation. I'm doing this for all of us. The lie was so profound, so complete, that it was almost a work of art. He wasn't just building his own future. He was actively sabotaging the careers of others to do it. He hadn't just emptied our father's legacy account. He was desecrating the very principles of integrity our father stood for. The man in the folder wasn't my brother. He was a predator wearing my brother's face. I walked out of that coffee shop and into the rain-slicked city streets, but I barely felt the cold. The folder Marcus had given me was tucked under my arm, a thin collection of paper that felt as heavy as a tombstone. It was the tombstone of my brother, or at least the idea of the brother I had carried in my heart for 35 years. There is a specific kind of grief for someone who is still alive. A mourning for the person they could have been, for the love you thought you shared. It is a hollow, empty ache. For the rest of that day and deep into the night, that ache was my only companion. I sat in the dark of my living room, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the wall. The rain traced lonely paths down the window pane. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I simply replayed a lifetime of memories, but now they were all tainted, viewed through the new, harsh lens of the truth. Every time I had paid his bill, every time I had smoothed things over with our mother, every time I had celebrated his hollow victories, they weren't acts of love. They were acts of enablement. I hadn't been his anchor. I had been his safety net, allowing him to leap from one betrayal to the next without ever facing the consequences. The weight of that realization was crushing. But then, somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, as the city finally fell into a hushed slumber, something inside me shifted. The grief, so vast and overwhelming, began to recede. It didn't disappear. Instead, it started to compress, to cool and harden under the immense pressure of the betrayal. The sorrow burned away, leaving behind something harder, colder, and infinitely more focused. It was a purpose in that moment. I understood. Leo believed my kindness was a weakness, my silence, an admission of inferiority. He had built his entire worldview on the premise that I was a harmless, sentimental fool. He was about to learn, in the most public and permanent way possible, just how wrong he was. My plan would require 2 things: absolute secrecy, and for Leo to believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that he had already won. The first part was easy. The second would require one final act of sacrifice on my part. My hand was perfectly steady as I picked up my phone. I composed a new text message to Leo, each word chosen with surgical precision. I've had some time to think. I wrote, "You're right. I've been too cautious. It's your money as much as it is mine. Good luck with your big plan." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. A minute later, 3 dots appeared, then vanished. He didn't even bother to reply. It was the exact response I had hoped for. In his mind, I had capitulated. The bad investment had finally accepted his place. He would be basking in his victory now, his guard completely down, his arrogance blinding him to the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. The next day, I called a meeting. It wasn't at a cafe, but in the secure, soundproofed boardroom on the top floor of the Innovatech Tower, a room I owned but had never set foot in. Only 2 other people were present: my CEO, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman named Sarah, and Marcus Thorne. I laid the folder on the polished mahogany table. Leo is a cancer within this company. I said, my voice even, and devoid of emotion. And it's time we cut him out. But we're not just going to fire him. We're going to build a stage, and we're going to let him dance his way right off the edge of it. For the next hour, we planned, we designed the perfect trap, a high-stakes, high-visibility solo project. Project Chimera. We called it. It would be presented as the opportunity of a lifetime, the final test before his coveted promotion, but woven into its very fabric was an ethical tripwire. A small, subtle flaw in the product data that would require absolute transparency to navigate correctly. It was a test of character, disguised as a test of skill. A test I already knew he would fail. Later that evening, feeling a strange mix of resolve and sorrow, I found myself drawn to a box of my father's old things I kept in the study. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I think I just wanted to feel a connection to him, to the man whose principles I was about to defend. I ran my hand over his old university textbooks, his favorite fountain pen. At the bottom of the box was a dusty, leather-bound journal I hadn't seen in years, tucked away inside a larger envelope marked old warranties, something I knew Leo, with his disdain for the past, he would never have bothered to look at. I thought my strategy was complete, based only on the evidence Marcus had given me. But my father, even from beyond the grave, had one final, devastating piece of truth to share. I opened the journal. His familiar, neat handwriting filled the pages. It wasn't a diary, but a ledger of pain. Page after page detailed the money he had loaned Leo over the years. Starting from when he was in college, $500 for car repairs, $1,000 for a sure-thing investment that vanished, $2,000 to cover gambling debts. Beside each entry, in my father's meticulous script, was a date and a note. Leo promised to repay by Christmas. Leo said the check is in the mail. Leo no longer answers my calls about this. The final entry was dated just a month before my father's fatal heart attack. It read, $15,000 for a down payment on his condo. He swore this was the last time. He swore he would make me proud. As I read those words, the cold purpose within me was forged into a blade of pure, unyielding steel. This was no longer just about my money or my pride. It was about honoring the memory of a good man whose trust had been bled dry by his own son. A plan, no matter how perfectly conceived, is nothing more than a dream until the first move is made. My first move was not a dramatic confrontation or a fiery accusation. It was a single, discreet email sent from my personal account to my CEO. Sarah, it contained only 3 words: Greenlight, Project, Chimera. With that, the gears of the machine I had designed began to turn, silent and invisible. I had laid the chessboard, placed the pieces, and now all I had to do was wait for my opponent to confidently step into the checkmate I had prepared for him. Leo, meanwhile, was living in the warm, golden glow of his perceived victory. From his perspective, the world was finally arranging itself to his liking. His weak-willed brother had been put in his place, and the funds for his grand ambition were secured. He sat at his desk at Innovatech, scrolling through photos of the Serenity Cove Resort, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. It was at that precise moment of self-congratulation that the email arrived. It was from the office of the CEO. The subject line read, Project Leadership Opportunity Project Chimera. His heart hammered in his chest. He clicked it open. The email was a masterpiece of corporate praise and tantalizing opportunity. It spoke of a new, high-priority initiative. to a solo project with unprecedented visibility. It was a chance, the email explained, for one of their most promising executives to demonstrate true leadership potential directly to the board. The final sentence was the hook, the line, and the sinker, Leo. Your name was at the very top of our list. This is your moment to shine. We're all watching. A surge of pure, uncut adrenaline shot through him. This was it. This was everything he had been working towards. His plan, his investment, was paying dividends before he had even packed his bags for the Bahamas. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, a laugh of pure triumph escaping his lips. He thought of me, his pathetic brother, and felt a surge of pity. Poor Elias. He just didn't understand how the world worked for winners. Brimming with a new sense of invincibility, Leo dove into the project brief. It was complex, demanding, but the potential payoff was enormous. He saw a shortcut immediately. The project required extensive market analysis, a process that would normally take weeks, but he knew of a restricted server, a repository of high-level competitive intelligence that was technically off-limits for a project at this stage. Accessing it was against protocol, but it would save him valuable time. He could better spend schmoozing. He navigated to the server directory, entered his credentials, and hit enter. Access denied. He frowned. That was odd. He tried again, typing his password more carefully. Access denied. A flicker of annoyance sparked within him. He called the IT department, his voice dripping with the impatience of a man whose important work was being held up by incompetence. Yes. This is Leo Vance in business development. He snapped. I can't seem to access the Phoenix server. Can you fix it? The voice on the other end was polite, but firm. I'm sorry. Mr. Vance, we can't do that. A new, system-wide security protocol was rolled out last night. Access to Tier 1 servers like Phoenix is now restricted on a project-by-project basis and requires executive authorization. Executive authorization, Leo scoffed. This project came from the executive office. Just grant me the access. I'm sorry. Sire, the IT tech repeated, his voice maddeningly calm. The authorization has to be submitted through the proper channels. It's a new policy. It's above our pay grade. Leo slammed the phone down, his face flushed with anger. Bureaucratic nonsense. He was annoyed, but not yet suspicious. It was a small inconvenience, a stupid hurdle in his otherwise glorious path. But for a man like Leo, who believed the world revolved around his will, any obstacle felt like a personal insult. The suspicion, the first cold tendril of real fear, would come later that evening. He was at home, pouring himself a glass of expensive whiskey. The anger from the IT incident having mostly subsided, he was finalizing his travel arrangements, imagining the look on the executives' faces when he presented the flawless results of Project Chimera. His laptop pinged with a new email. This one wasn't from work. It was from the fraud prevention department of his bank. The subject, urgent action, required unusual activity on your joint account. His blood went cold. He opened it. The email was filled with formal, intimidating language. Dear Mr. Vance, as part of our commitment to client security, our systems have flagged a recent large transaction on your joint account. Number, ending in 4321. To protect your assets, a temporary hold has been placed on the outbound wire transfer of $74,000 to Serenity Cove Holdings, LLC. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to verify this activity. He stared at the words, his mind racing. A temporary hold. He snatched his phone and frantically dialed the bank's customer service line. He was put on hold, forced to listen to cheerful, insulting music for 10 agonizing minutes. Finally, a representative answered. He explained the situation, his voice tight with controlled rage. The answer he received was a hollow echo of his call with the IT department. Yes, Mr. Vance. I see the hold here. It's a standard anti-fraud procedure for large international transfers to new recipients. It can take 3 to 5 business days for our verification team to review it. 3 to 5 days, he yelled into the phone. I don't have 3 to 5 days. That money needs to be there by tomorrow. Can't you just approve it? I'm sorry. Sir. The voice chirped. Infuriatingly pleasant. It's a new policy to protect our clients. There's nothing I can do to expedite the process. After the call ended, Leo stood in the middle of his pristine apartment, the whiskey in his hand forgotten. The two events of the day, the blocked access at his job, the frozen funds in his bank account began to connect in his mind like 2 points of a closing vice. These weren't random acts of bureaucratic incompetence. They were too precise, too targeted. It felt like an invisible hand was suddenly moving pieces on a board he didn't even know he was playing on. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But in that moment, a chilling certainty washed over him. He was being hunted. Panic is a poor strategist. It clouds judgment, amplifies fear, and invariably leads to self-destruction. For 2 days, Leo was a prisoner in his own mind, tormented by a faceless, formless enemy. Every email notification made him jump. Every polite hello in the office hallway felt like an accusation. His mind cycled through a list of potential enemies, a jealous colleague, the IT technician he'd been rude to, an executive who saw him as a threat. His thoughts kept circling back to me. But his arrogance always pushed the idea away. Elias impossible. His brother was a feather, not a hammer. He was incapable of orchestrating something so sophisticated. This conviction, this utter inability to see me as anything more than the passive failure he had created in his own mind, would be his undoing. Trapped and desperate, he did what he had always done when backed into a corner. He reached for his most reliable weapon, the one that had never failed him. He called our mother, but this time, the weapon misfired. Mom, he began, his voice strained with a carefully rehearsed panic. It's Elias. I think he's trying to ruin me. He's jealous of the Innovatech project. He's telling people things. He's trying to sabotage my career. He waited for the familiar rush of maternal sympathy, the immediate promise to talk some sense into his older brother. Instead, there was a pause. When our mother finally spoke, her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual warmth. Leo, she said, her tone heavy. Are you sure you're telling me everything Elias has never been a jealous person? Why would he start now? Leo was stunned into silence for a moment. This was not the script. What, Mom? Whose side are you on? I'm your son. He's the one who's been acting strange. He's the one who threatened me over the account. He told me to ask you about your father's notebook. She interrupted, and the words fell like stones into the conversation. Leo's breath hitched. What notebook? He stammered, his mind reeling. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Leo, she said, and for the first time, he heard not anger, but a profound, bottomless disappointment in her voice. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You need to fix this with your brother. I can't help you with this one. The call ended, leaving Leo staring at his phone in disbelief. For years, our mother's unconditional love had been his shield. He could commit any sin, tell any lie, and know that she would be there to defend him. But a seed of doubt had been planted, and for the first time, When he reached for his shield, he found it was no longer there. Now truly alone, and with the project deadline looming, his panic curdled into a reckless arrogance, blocked from the servers. He was forced to conduct the market analysis himself. But he was running out of time. He spent 2 sleepless nights compiling the report, but there were gaps, inconsistencies he couldn't resolve without the high-level data he was denied. On the final night before the presentation was due, he made his fatal mistake. Staring at a complex spreadsheet forecasting market penetration, he threw his hands up in frustration. Nobody even reads this far, he muttered to himself, his voice raw with exhaustion. They only look at the executive summary. And so, he began to invent. He fabricated data points, creating a smooth, perfect upward curve where the real, messy data should have been. He invented customer testimonials. He inflated the potential return on investment from a respectable 22% to an irresistible 45%. He wasn't just fudging the numbers, he was composing a work of fiction. A beautiful, compelling lie built on a foundation of pure arrogance. He was certain that the executives on the board, with their million-dollar salaries and packed schedules, would never bother to check the raw data in an appendix. They would see his confidence, his perfect slides, and they would be dazzled. A liar's greatest enemy is their own arrogance. They build a prison of deceit and are always surprised when they find themselves trapped inside. He submitted the completed Project Chimera report at 3 o'clock in the morning. A triumphant click of the mouse, sealing his fate. A wave of relief washed over him. He had done it. He had navigated the obstacles, outsmarted the invisible enemy, and created a masterpiece. He felt a flicker of his old confidence return. He would nail the presentation, the funds would be released, and this entire nightmare would be behind him. He allowed himself a small, exhausted smile and was about to close his laptop when a new email arrived. It was from the bank again, but the tone was different. It was no longer a polite notification, it was a formal, legal summons. The subject line read, "Mandatory session, notice account mediation." He opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Mr. Vance," it began, "as per the terms agreed upon in your premium joint account agreement, a withdrawal exceeding 80% of the total account value has triggered a mandatory family financial mediation session to ensure fiduciary clarity. This session is a non-negotiable component of the account protocol. Your attendance, along with the attendance of the other account holder, Elias Vance, is required. The session has been scheduled for Friday, October 17th, at 10 o'clock in the morning at our downtown branch. Failure to attend will result in a formal review of all account activities for the past 5 years." He read the email 3 times, the words blurring together. October 17th. That was the day after his presentation. This wasn't a hold he could wait out. This wasn't a problem he could charm his way out of. This was a summons, a legal obligation to sit in a room with the brother he had robbed and betrayed, forced to account for his actions. The walls weren't just closing in anymore. They had slammed shut, trapping him between the professional guillotine he had just built for himself at work, and the personal and financial reckoning that was now legally unavoidable. There was nowhere left to run. The week leading up to the presentation was a special kind of hell for Leo. On the surface, he was a portrait of focused ambition, a rising star preparing for his defining moment. He spent his days locked in a conference room, meticulously rehearsing his lines, polishing his slides until they gleamed with the promise of impossible profits. He smiled at colleagues in the hallway, projected an aura of unshakable confidence, and spoke of the future of Innovatech as if it were his to command. But it was all a facade, a carefully constructed mask hiding a growing abyss of terror. At night, a sleep offered no escape. He was haunted by the twin specters of his impending judgment, the boardroom of executives he had to deceive, and the mediation room, where he would be forced to face the brother he had betrayed. The first cracks in his public mask began to show 2 days before the presentation. Power in a place like Innovatic wasn't just about your title. It was about the invisible network of favors and loyalties you built. Leo had never built anything. He had only taken. And now, when he needed help the most, he found his social accounts were completely empty. He ran into an issue with a data visualization on one of his slides and approached a small group of junior analysts, the very same ones whose work he had stolen in the past. "Hey, team," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "Got a quick one for you. My chart rendering is bugging out. Can one of you take a look?" He expected them to jump at the chance to help a senior manager. Instead, they exchanged a quick, knowing glance. One of them, a bright young woman whose idea about market synergy he had presented as his own 3 months ago, looked up at him, her expression polite, but her eyes cold as ice. "Sorry, Leo," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We're completely swamped with the quarterly reports for Marcus. I'm sure with your talent, you'll handle it just fine on your own." The others murmured their agreement, turning back to their screens in a gesture of collective, final dismissal. Leo stood there for a moment, the fake smile frozen on his face. It was a small rebellion, a quiet act of defiance. But to him, it was as loud as a slamming door. The whispers had started. The tide was turning. He was no longer one of them. The final, devastating blow came that night. He was pacing his apartment, running through his presentation for the 100th time, when the doorbell rang. It was our mother. She wasn't angry. She wasn't yelling. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, she just looked tired, her face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have aged her 10 years overnight. In her hands, she was clutching our father's leather-bound journal. "Hello, Leo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She walked past him and sat on the edge of his designer sofa, placing the journal on the glass coffee table between them as if it were a sacred artifact. I think we need to talk." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He immediately launched into his well-rehearsed defense. "Mom, if this is about Elias, he's lying. He's twisting things. He's trying to make me look bad because he's jealous. That's all it is." She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the book. "I called him," she said softly, "after I spoke to you. He didn't say a single bad word about you. Leo, he just told me to read this." She finally looked up, her eyes pleading. "Please, just tell me what's in this book is a misunderstanding. Tell me your father was just confused." Leo's throat went dry. He stared at the journal, the silent witness to a lifetime of his deceit. He could have confessed. He could have broken down, admitted everything, and thrown himself at her mercy. But his arrogance, his pathological need to never be wrong, was stronger than his fear. It's old history. "Mom," he said, forcing a dismissive laugh. "Dad was always a worrier. Those were loans, not handouts. It was all just misunderstandings." Our mother slowly opened the journal. Her hands trembling slightly, she turned to the last page, to the last entry written in our father's hand. Her voice was thick with unshed tears as she read the words aloud. $15,000 for a down payment on his condo. He swore this was the last time. He swore he would make me proud. She looked up from the page, and her gaze finally broke him. It was a look of utter, soul-shattering disillusionment. He was so proud of the man he thought you were becoming. she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. He told everyone his son was going to be a success. And all this time, you were just using him. You were using all of us. She closed the book with a soft, final thud. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. The movements of someone carrying an immense weight. Leo surged forward, his carefully constructed composure finally shattering. Mom, wait, he begged, his voice cracking. Please. The presentation is tomorrow. I need you. Please. Just help me. She paused at the door, her back to him. For a moment, he thought he had reached her. Then she spoke, her voice clear and resolute, though filled with a pain that tore through him. I will always love you. Leo, she said, without turning around. But I cannot be a part of this lie anymore. Your father deserved better. Elias deserves better. She opened the door. You are on your own. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the silent apartment like a judge's gavel. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, stripped of his last and most powerful ally on the eve of his judgment day. The morning of the presentation, the city was shrouded in a cold, gray mist. It was a fitting backdrop for the final act of my brother's tragedy. He walked into the Innovatech Tower, not as a confident predator, but as a man walking to his own execution, a ghost haunting the final hours of his own life. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, the twin deadlines of the presentation and the mediation circling him like vultures. Sleep had been a stranger. Yet, when he stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor, the mask was perfectly in place. His suit was immaculate. His smile was sharp. And his eyes, though shadowed with exhaustion, burned with a desperate, feverish ambition. He had been told the meeting would be with a few senior executives, but when he was ushered into the main boardroom, he stopped short. The room was full. Seated around the vast, polished mahogany table was not a small committee, but the entire board of directors, a formidable collection of the city's most powerful business figures. At the head of the table sat Sarah, our CEO. Beside her sat Marcus Thorne. For a fleeting moment, a jolt of pure panic shot through Leo. Then, his all-consuming arrogance reinterpreted the scene. This wasn't an interrogation. It was a coronation. They had all gathered to witness his genius, to anoint him as the company's next great leader. A slow, confident smile spread across his face. He had them right where he wanted them. He was a performer, and this was his grandest stage. For the next 45 minutes, he was magnificent. He moved with a practiced grace, his voice a perfect instrument of persuasion. He painted a vivid picture of a future built on the flawless data of Project Chimera. The slides he had created were a work of art, full of bold graphics and beautiful, upward trending charts. The 45% return on investment figure hung on the screen. A number, so seductive, it was almost hypnotic. He saw the board members nodding, their expressions impressed. He saw a flicker of what he thought was admiration in Sarah's eyes. In that moment, he allowed himself to believe. He believed he had done it. He believed his lies were strong enough to become the truth. He believed he was going to win. When he finished, a ripple of polite applause went through the room. Leo inclined his head, a humble victor accepting his due. Sarah stood up, a warm smile on her face. Thank you, Leo, she said, her voice smooth as silk. A truly bold and compelling vision. The board is very impressed. Leo felt a wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled his knees. And for a decision of this magnitude, Sarah continued, her eyes sweeping across the room, It's only right that we get the final approval from the man who started it all. Our founder and the chairman of the board, who has graciously joined us today for the very first time. A quiet murmur went through the room. Leo frowned, confused. He had never heard of a chairman being involved in this way. He turned, following the gazes of the board members to the large oak door at the head of the room. The door opened, and I walked in. Time seemed to slow down. I saw my brother's face, a mask of polite expectation. As he looked towards the door, I saw the initial flicker of confusion in his eyes as he saw me. I saw the disbelief that followed, the slight shake of his head as his brain refused to process what it was seeing. And then, I saw the moment of pure, unadulterated horror, as 35 years of lies and self-delusion came crashing down upon him in a single, silent, cataclysmic instant. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a pale, hollowed-out statue of the man he had pretended to be. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I walked calmly to the head of the table and took the empty chair beside Sarah. I didn't look at Leo. I addressed the room. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here." I then picked up the bound copy of the Project Chimera report that sat in front of me. I flipped through a few pages. The crisp sound of the paper, the only noise in the dead silent room. Finally, I stopped. I looked up, and for the first time, my eyes met my brother's across the vast, polished expanse of the table. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And then, I spoke. My voice was quiet, perfectly level, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Thank you, Leo. An impressive presentation." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Before we proceed, could you please turn to Appendix 3, Section 4. In your technical report, I'd like for you to walk the board through the raw data from the pressure test simulations." It was over. I knew it. He knew it. Everyone in that room knew it. There was no Appendix 3. Section 4 with raw data. There was only the lie. He stood there, frozen, a fly caught in amber. The dazzling slides of his fictional success still glowing on the screen behind him like a cruel epitaph. Sarah stood up, her voice crisp and final. "Leo Vance," she announced to the silent room. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Innovatech Solutions is terminated for cause, pending a full investigation into gross ethical violations and the deliberate falsification of company data." I didn't stay to watch him escorted out. My work was done. He had spent his life playing a dirty game of checkers. All bluster and quick, cheap moves, sacrificing everyone around him for his own advancement. He never realized he was on a chessboard, playing against a grandmaster who saw the entire board and the quiet, unassuming brother he had dismissed as a bad investment had just said, "Checkmate." 6 months later, the gray mist that had seemed to perpetually hang over the city that autumn had finally given way to a crisp, clear spring. The world felt new again, washed clean, and in many ways, so did I. The immediate aftermath of Leo's termination had been a quiet storm of legal formalities and hushed corporate gossip. He never showed up for the mandatory bank mediation. By forfeiting, he legally ceded any claim to the funds he had tried to steal, and the account was quietly closed. A painful purpose served. Our mother, heartbroken but resolute, acted as a somber intermediary, handling the logistics of his departure from a life he had not built, but stolen. My own life transformed. The secret of my ownership of Innovatech was now public, and the transition from a shadow founder to a visible chairman had been both challenging and liberating. I found that the principles my father had taught me, integrity, loyalty, quiet competence were not liabilities in the corporate world, but assets. I stood at the head of the boardroom table, the same table where my brother's world had ended, and outlined my vision for the company's future. It was a vision built not on shortcuts and dazzling lies, but on sustainable growth and a culture of respect. One of my first official acts was to promote Marcus Thorne to the newly created position of Chief Operations Officer. In the quiet handshake that sealed his promotion, we both knew we were honoring the legacy of the man who had taught us both what it meant to be a person of character. I rarely asked about Leo, but my mother would sometimes share small, sad details. He had lost the expensive condo, the car, the entire glittering facade of his life. After a few months of silence, he had found a job. He was working as a logistics coordinator for a small shipping company. A humbling role of spreadsheets and schedules. She told me he was quieter now, that the arrogant, performative energy that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. There was no joy for me in hearing about his diminished life. There was only a quiet, somber sense that the universe had finally, painfully, righted itself. He hadn't been destroyed. He had simply been reduced to the truth of himself, stripped of the lies he had worn like a suit of armor for so many years. The true end of the story, for me, came on a quiet Saturday afternoon. A small, neatly wrapped package arrived, sent by my mother. There was no note from her on the outside. My heart beat a little faster as I opened it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was my father's leather-bound journal. I lifted it out. Its familiar weight, a comfort in my hands. Tucked between the pages was a single sheet of white paper. Folded once, I opened it. There were only 2 words, written in Leo's unfamiliar, humbled handwriting. I'm sorry. I stared at those 2 words for a long time. They were not a magic elixir. They did not erase the years of lies, the casual cruelty, the profound betrayal. They did not magically restore the brother I thought I had. The love I once felt for him was a phantom limb. I would forever feel the shape of its absence. But the words were something else. They were an acknowledgement, an admission. They were a single, small stone of truth laid upon a mountain of deceit. And for me, that was enough. I felt no urge to call him, no desire for a tearful reunion. The story of our brotherhood was over. But my story, the story of Elias, was just beginning. I closed the journal. I walked over to the bookshelf in my study, a place filled with books on business, philosophy, and art. I cleared a space in the center, a place of honor, and I put my father's journal there, not as a reminder of a painful past, but as a testament to a lesson learned. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls you. I was no longer a brother defined by another's betrayal. I was simply a man, at peace in the quiet of his own home. Finally, completely free. The story of my brother and me is a painful lesson in a simple truth trust, especially within a family, is like glass. Once shattered, even if you can piece it back together, the cracks will always remain. It taught me that true strength isn't always found in loud confrontations or dramatic forgiveness. Sometimes, the most powerful response to betrayal is a quiet, calculated plan that allows consequences to speak for themselves. My brother saw my silence as weakness, but in the end, it was the silence that allowed me to see the entire board, to understand that the best revenge isn't loud and angry, but intelligent y precise, and undeniable. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever felt your kindness mistaken for weakness or your loyalty taken for granted, please know that the pain you feel is real and valid, But also know that setting a boundary to protect your own peace and self-worth is not an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You are not a bad investment. You are the most valuable asset you will ever have. And you have the right to protect it from anyone, even those who share your blood. And so, I leave you with a question. What would you have done in my shoes? Do you believe in giving endless second chances? Or is there a point where you must protect yourself? No matter who it is, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength to make their own move. There are moments in life that act as hinges, swinging a door open to a future you never anticipated. For me, that moment wasn't a dramatic explosion or a tearful confession. It was a quiet laugh over the phone, a sound so full of casual contempt that it instantly incinerated 35 years of brotherly love and trust. It was the moment I realized the person I had spent my life protecting was, in fact, the greatest threat I had ever faced. This isn't a story about simple revenge. It's a story about the devastating price of blind loyalty and the cold, hard clarity that comes when you are finally forced to see the truth. It's about how I discovered my brother had stolen our family's savings, and how he, in turn, discovered that the failure he so easily dismissed was the secret owner of the very company where he was desperately trying to build his kingdom. I, Elias, 35, male, have always believed that family was the bedrock of everything. It was a belief instilled in me by our late father, a man who valued integrity over profit and loyalty over ambition. When he passed away, he left my younger brother Leo and me with a modest inheritance and a joint savings account. It was more than just money. It was a symbol of his wish for us to always look out for each other. A financial safety net woven from the threads of brotherhood. For years, I was the primary contributor to that account, quietly adding to it from my earnings as a freelance consultant. I never minded that Leo, with his flashier lifestyle and endless can't-miss opportunities, contributed very little. I was the older brother. It was my job to be the stable one, the anchor. It was a role I accepted without question, a burden I carried with a quiet sense of pride. That pride, I would soon learn, was simply the blindfold I had willingly tied over my own eyes. Story 2. My older sister, Dove 29 Farids, is divorced and living with my parents because she dropped out of college for her wealthy boyfriend, who later divorced her when she revealed her true colors. Growing up, my relationship with my sister was never great. She was the smart and attractive one. Her evil, narcissistic sister tried to seduce my fiancé before our wedding in an attempt to end our relationship, but she was caught on camera and disowned by my parents. Kind of conceited, my parents always supported her and praised her, which left me feeling incompetent. People would compliment her appearance while I was just being mean, and she would use all of that to make me feel insecure by saying that no one liked me. Those childhood insults left me feeling extremely insecure because my parents never stood by me and ignored my feelings because she always met their expectations. So I kind of cut off contact with them as a child, and adolescent, my room as well. And once they even ruined my project and I nearly failed. I was going to tell Mom about it. However, Dove blackmailed me by claiming that she would show my unattractive photos to my classmates, which terrified me as a 4-year-old. She never accepted responsibility for her actions, and it was useless to tell my parents because they never paid attention anyhow. She did a lot of things that made me despise her. And Mom never stood by me. But Dad would occasionally call her out after she sent strange pictures of me using my phone. I don't understand why she had such a strong dislike for me, later. I discovered that she was a narcissist and that it had nothing to do with me. She was a major red flag in her relationship and literally cheated on every guy she dated. I hate to admit it, but the fact that her ex is still my friend says it all. She betrayed me by spilling coffee on my prom dress after I complained to my dad about her, She then played the victim by crying and claiming that she did it by accident. As an adult, nothing changed. Her behavior deteriorated, and it was all my parents' fault because they never attempted to discipline her. Nevertheless, after school, I worked hard to get into my dream college, and after a few years of hardship, I got my dream job there. At an office conference, I met Atlas, the love of my life. He was intelligent, kind, and attractive, and we clicked right away. Within a few months, we began going on dates, taking frequent vacations, date trips, and tracks, and Atlas was close to his sibling. So a few months into our relationship, he introduced me to his parents and brothers. However, I took my time introducing him to my parents, primarily because of my sister Dove and her malicious intent. I always had a persistent fear that she would ruin everything because she was the one who always got the best things as a child and a teenager. And now that my life was going better than hers, I'm sure she wouldn't be able to handle it, especially the relationship part. But I couldn't wait any longer. Atlas was becoming suspicious of my hesitation to introduce my family. So, after a year and a half of dating, I told my dad about him. He was pleased that I had found a man worthy of me, and he invited us to dinner. I was both excited and anxious, because I knew Dove would stop at nothing to ruin my life. But he was calm about it and said he'd take care of things. A few days after I called my dad, I received a call from Dove. It was unexpected because she had never called me before and questioned me about Atlas. She was more interested in learning specifics about Atlas when I was at home. I suppose my mother would have informed her that I was seeing this guy, and that we were getting serious. Now that she's attempting to get cozy with me, I know why she's interested. But I'm unsure if I should really take the chance of introducing Atlas to do so because I know her intentions are bad. I'm also considering other options besides calling my parents over at my house to introduce Atlas Update 1. Thank you for all the great advice. A few of you commented, wanting to know more about Dove. Well, it's true that my parents, especially my dad, changed their minds about my sister after her divorce. And she ruined it for herself. She was very good academically. But as soon as she started college, her entire focus was on her body and beauty. Dove met this guy, Jeremy, who was extremely wealthy, and they started dating, putting her studies on hold while I was preparing for my college entrance exams. She insisted that I would never be accepted to my dream college, but I did. And for the first time, I received approval from my parents. They were pleased and proud of me. But my sister was jealous when everyone was focused on me and not on her. My parents threw a celebration party for me with close family and friends to celebrate my accomplishment. And she wanted to spoil it and steal the show. So she announced her engagement to Jeremy there. It was obvious from Jeremy's face that he was unaware of this. But she was. I told her that I'm not a gold digger like her and that I can pay my own bills while she can have the rich husband she wants. She was evil overall and the most selfish person I've ever met in my life. After she was successful in her mission to make that day about her, everyone became excited to learn about Jeremy because he was apparently rich, according to my sister Dove, who constantly made me feel bad by showing me the expensive gifts he bought her and saying that I'd never land a rich husband because I'm ugly and nobody would want to date someone like me. Later, Dove and Jeremy got engaged, but I was already at college and missed the engagement. During my time in college, I never spoke to her. So it felt good to go home for the holidays because Dove was living with Jeremy. Even during the holidays, she would take trips to exotic places with Jeremy. After a year of dating, they were married in a lavish wedding, with Jeremy paying for the majority of the costs. Of course, her father paid the remaining amount as a courtesy because she didn't earn anything during their union, sustained for a short time before divorcing after 3 years. I learned that Dove didn't want a child, but Jeremy was keen to become a father. He told me he never coerced Dove, but he detested the fact that she had never expressed her preferences before and had avoided talking to him for 3 years. He also mentioned her drinking and partying habits, flirting with men in bars, and the fact that she married him solely for financial gain and had no emotional bond. I questioned whether he was foolish for not understanding her motivation. For a long time, Jeremy showed me videos of Dub going out drinking with men and getting touched inappropriately, and she didn't stop them. It was good for him that he got rid of her. But my parents supported Dove and blamed Jeremy for forcing her to have children without ever acknowledging Dove's responsibility. After the divorce, Dove moved in with my parents because she wasn't making any money and dropped out of college to marry Jeremy. Now, 5 years later, she has no business experience and no college degree. After 2 years of my career, I landed my dream job with great money, and my parents were thrilled. I visited home after the job offer, and Dad was so proud of me. I couldn't be happier, and we were having dinner when Dove returned home looking somewhat drunk. In reality, though, she was happy being free. Within a month of her divorce, she was back to her game of clubbing and hookups, and her Instagram stories were enough to let me know what she was really up to. Sight and said, Dove should have pursued education like me and not messed up her life behind Jeremy showing how much I was earning and that Dove was still dependent on them for money. When Mom asked Dad not to make such remarks, Dove lost it and slammed the door. At that point, Dad realized how spoiled Dove was, and he told Mom to make Dove understand that she needs to take her life seriously and get back on her feet instead of leeching on them. I believe she did that because later, she entered my room and told me that I could never be. I used to be heartbroken by all of these remarks as a teenager, but now I just don't care. I laughed at her and said, I really didn't want to be like her, and she clearly needed to fix her attitude. Oh my God. She let out her wrath upon hearing this and asked me to leave the house. I thought, this is my parents' house, and she was no one to boss over me. The following day, as I was packing to return, I noticed that too. One of my dresses was visibly torn with scissors. So I went downstairs and showed my parents Du's childish behavior. Dad called for Dove in a fit of rage. But Mom tried to explain that Dove was stunned and didn't know what she was doing. Dad told Mom to keep her out of it, but he stormed at her and told her to get her act together. He couldn't support her any longer and put up with her narcissism, which didn't sit well with Dove. And she hated me for it. Hatred, however, became intolerable when she attempted to approach my boyfriend. After much consideration and discussion with Atlas, I ultimately made the decision to bring Atlas to my parents. I told them that there was no point in keeping Atlas hidden from Dove because, no matter how hard I tried, she would have eventually found him. My friends told me that it would be better to test the man now rather than lose him later, because Dove would only succeed in his malicious intention if Atlas gave in with great dread. Dove pushed herself on him for an embrace while he was greeting Mom and Dad. I'm not sure what made her believe Atlas would be swayed by her appearance. She had changed her appearance, dyed her blonde hair black, and gotten all dolled up in a new dress, with her hair and nails done, as though Atlas were going on a date with her. At the dinner table, she hurried to sit next to Atlas when I asked her to move and that I wanted to sit there. After dinner, I went to take a shower, and Atlas was by himself when Dove walked in asking Atlas to call her number. She kept asking Atlas about his interests, and if he said he liked something, she would say she liked it too. If she didn't, she would continue to talk about how she and Atlas were so compatible and wink at me, not to take it seriously, but obviously to cover up the fact that Atlas was really awkward. He ignored her and interrupted the conversation with Dad and Mom. When I was busy with other things, Dove tried to win his sympathy by telling me her heartbreaking story of divorce and mental distress that took years for her to recover. The fun part was that Mom joined her in bitching about Jeremy After a while, Atlas asked if I wanted to go for a walk and give him a tour of the neighborhood. Before I could respond, my sister got up and said, "Sure," and Atlas gave her a startled look and said he wanted to show her around the neighborhood. "I have some alone time with me." Her face flushed with shame, and she went into her room. It's only been a few days since that visit, and I'm waiting for Dove to use her strategies to get Atlas inside her pants. I'm afraid, but I also trust my man, so I want to see how he responds to her advances. Hello, everyone. I'm engaged. Atlas proposed to me last month while traveling. And yes, he got down on his knees with a ring, and I couldn't stop gushing over it. Moreover, Dove did attempt to use her tactics after my visit to my parents. For the first few weeks, Atlas would show me Dew's frantic greetings and heartfelt messages asking him about his work. She pretended to be caring as well. But after a while, he stopped telling me about her messages. So I assumed she had given up on him. Dove was manipulating Atlas by texting him to ask how he was doing and bombarding his inbox with adorable cat videos. Even though she had never had any affection for cats, she then got one for herself. We kind of moved on from her topic as well. Of course, we had better things to do and a busy work schedule. One day, I was looking through my social media and noticed that Dove had joined Atlas's account. She was liking and commenting on all of his posts with those adorable, goofy heart icons. She had even left comments on his old photos and videos from the previous 7 or 10 years. I didn't feel good about it, and when I suddenly checked his phone, I discovered that Dove was still occasionally texting him, but her messages were, in the call records, there were missed calls, including one at approximately 3 in the morning, and they were a little strange. She was making a lot of effort to catch Atlas's attention. When I asked Atlas why he hadn't told me about Dove texting him, he became very agitated and said he was ignoring it because he felt it was best that we didn't talk about her. I pressed him about the calls, and he remained composed before sitting me down and telling me that one day Dove called him when she was really upset, and he became afraid and thought something was wrong. But then she began talking about some traumatic things about Jeremy and needed someone to talk to. Atlas told her that it wasn't appropriate to call in this late and that she should talk to her parents. That really got to me. I told him that keeping this information from me was not going well with me, and I might stop trusting him. He assured me that he would never fall for her tricks, and that I had nothing to worry about. I've read hundreds of posts like this, where despite my best efforts to avoid it, my husband has fallen for this trick, and I don't want to make a fool of myself by blindly trusting him. I told him that he should give me the phone whenever Dove calls him again because I wanted to catch her in the act of her malice. One day, her call came through and woke me up in the middle of the night. I answered, and she was silent when she heard my voice. She then said it was an error and hung up. I called her numerous times the following day to warn her, but she never responded. I texted her from Atlas's. I told her over the phone that it was me, that she shouldn't call or text Atlas during OD hours, and that she should call me instead of him if there was an emergency. She stopped texting him after that, and I was finally at ease that she was no longer in our lives. After Atlas proposed to me, I sent my dad a picture of the ring, which must have been seen by Mom and Dove, and she resumed her stalking behavior, sending him pointless videos and texts. I was so done with her that I called her and yelled at her. She remained quiet for the most part while I let loose all of my pent-up rage. But I didn't realize she wasn't going to give up, because as soon as I hung up, I received a call from Mom, who was furious and screaming at me for insulting my sister Dove. I told Mom that I was accusing her of stealing my fiancé, and she said, "Your cruelty has given my daughter panic attacks. Can't you be a little considerate towards your sister who has been struggling with depression over the years and that she was still recovering from her traumatic divorce?" Which was funny because Dove was never depressed about her divorce. Anyway, I ended the call and told Dad that I would have cut them off from my life if they kept playing the puppet in her game. I was done ignoring her update 3. I never imagined she would go to such a low level. She had always made my life miserable. But I never imagined she would try to woo my fiancé before my wedding. It was one thing for her to bully me and make fun of me, but it was another. It was difficult to accept that she truly attempted to woo my fiancé and ruin our wedding. So we were gradually organizing it. I stopped talking to Mom after the last argument, but she called me and said she was sorry for yelling at me. She said she was afraid that Dove was having panic attacks, so she lost her temper. Earlier, one of my cousins told me that Dove had been crying at my happy life and telling everyone that I was accusing her of stealing my fiancé and that I wasn't worthy of everything I was getting the job. And, most importantly, Atlas said that Dove should have the best of everything because she is the most beautiful person and not me. I told Mom about this, and she fell silent. She said, "Okay, forget everything and focus on your wedding and your happy life ahead." Everything went according to plan, and Dove was keeping things low-key throughout this time. On the day of our wedding, we were at the venue busy getting ready for the big moment when Atlas's best friend called and asked me to come to Atlas's wedding. I jokingly made fun of Atlas's inability to see the bride before the wedding, but he responded that it was serious and that we needed to deal with it beforehand. My heart was racing, so I hurried to his room with my parents. Atlas was lying shirtless and slipping in and out of consciousness as his groomsmen described Dove's crafty strategies. Atlas was getting ready in his room when Dove brought him a drink, which he refused to take. But Dove made him. Atlas took a sip, and he realized that the drink was spiked, excused himself, and went to the bathroom. He called his friend, explained everything, and invited him to come over. By the time his friend burst through the door, Atlas had already partially fainted and was out of the bathroom. Since his friend shared the room with Atlas, he had to turn on his camera while slinking into the room and hearing Atlas yell at Dove to leave him alone as she was sitting on him, taking off her clothes and massaging him. This repulsive act was caught on camera. She pretended to be making out with Atlas's friend, covered herself, and went outside without realizing she was being filmed. She smirked at his friend and asked him not to tell anyone about it. When we arrived, Atlas was still partially unconscious, and the drink was so strong that it gave him a headache and dizziness after just a few sips. Also, there were some solid particles at the bottom of the drink. It was an extremely embarrassing moment for my parents, and Mom called her and asked her to come to Atlas's room because they couldn't believe Dove would do something so terrible. She arrived with smudged lipstick on her face and said, "I know you guys are mad at me, but it was mutual. Atlas loves me, and he has been making advances on me ever since he met me, and today he convinced me for a one-time hookup before the wedding." Mom gave her a hard slap, telling her that we knew the BS she was trying to pull off, and that her hornet had been caught on camera. She was shocked to learn that my parents had expelled her from. She purposely wanted everyone to know that she was making out with Atlas. So I canceled the wedding. My dad called the doctor, who confirmed that Atlas had been served a spiked drink that damaged his head. And Atlas's parents and siblings were so upset that they wanted to find her. My parents had to apologize to them to calm them down. And the wedding was postponed until Atlas recovered after having multiple episodes of vomiting. When Atlas recovered, he walked me down the aisle. I was happy to see him as my husband, but I was also anxious about everything that had happened. Atlas added one more thing to his vows. He would protect our relationship from people who didn't want to see us together. After we returned from our honeymoon, my parents came to visit and apologized to Atlas for all the trouble Dove had caused. After that, we were served hot gossip for the next few days. That Dove would leave our lives. In fact, he told her to live alone after kicking her out of the house. I'm still struggling to move past the incident. My wedding was on the verge of being called off, and if his friend hadn't recorded it, I never would have thought Atlas wasn't involved. Story 3. There are moments in life that act as fault lines. Tiny, almost invisible fractures that, under enough pressure, you can split your entire world in two. For most of my life, I believed that family was a safe harbor, a bedrock of unconditional love. I learned, in the most brutal way possible, that sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that brew within your own home. Behind the smiles you trust the most, I am Elena, a 32-year-old woman. And this is not just a story of revenge. It's a story about the slow, agonizing death of an illusion and the painful birth of a reality I was forced to accept. It is the story of how a single, devastating betrayal from my older sister, Isabel, uncovered a decade-long conspiracy and forced me to become a person I never thought I could be. To understand how it all fell apart, you must first understand how it was held together by my silence and my sister's insatiable need to be the center of every universe. In my memory, the years before everything changed are painted in the soft, warm colors of nostalgia. They were defined by a quiet routine, a sense of order that I, as a financial analyst, found deeply comforting. My life was a series of spreadsheets and predictable outcomes, and I believe my family operated on a similar, unspoken ledger of love and mutual support. Isabel, my sister, who was 2 years my senior, was the vibrant, chaotic entry that I was always trying to balance. She was a successful event planner, a whirlwind of social energy and charisma, and I, in my quiet way, admired her. I also enabled her. I remember one particular Tuesday evening, the city lights outside my office window blurring into a watercolor painting against the dark glass. I was rehearsing the final points for a career-defining presentation. The culmination of 3 months of work. My phone buzzed on the polished desk. A frantic text from Isabel, lighting up the screen. Elena, it's a catastrophe. My landlord is threatening to evict me tomorrow. I'm short on rent. Just this once. I don't know who else to turn to. A familiar weariness settled over me. It was never just this once, but the alternative, imagining my sister in distress. The ensuing family drama was always worse. Isai had closed the laptop and transferred the $1,500 to her account. The reply came almost instantly. TTX, you're a lifesaver. And that was it. No questions about my presentation. No promise to pay me back. Just a transaction, logged in the silent ledger of our sisterhood. A few days later, while scrolling through my social media feed during a lunch break, a photo stopped my thumb, mid-swipe. It was Isabel, tagged at a 5-star spa resort. A new designer handbag perched on the table next to her champagne flute. The caption read, "A little self-care is non-negotiable." Treating myself after a stressful week, a brief, hot flash of anger pricked at my conscience. It was the price of her rent, sitting on that table. But then, as always, the second wave of thought washed it away, the voice of reason, or perhaps the voice of denial. She must have been incredibly stressed. I told myself, she works hard. She deserves it. It's not worth a fight. I liked the photo and moved on. The crack was there, but I refused to see it. The signs were never loud alarms, they were whispers in the background noise of our lives. I remember a family dinner, the air filled with the comforting aroma of my mother's roast chicken. I had gone to the kitchen to refill the water pitcher when I overheard Isabel's voice. A low, conspiratorial hiss. Coming from the hallway. The key is perception. She was saying into her phone. As long as Mom and Dad are convinced she's too fragile to handle pressure, the arrangements will fall into place perfectly. She won't even see it coming. I froze. The cold pitcher in my hand. Arrangements fragile. Just then, She turned the corner and saw me. Her face, for a split second, was a mask of cold calculation. Then, it melted into her signature. Dazzling smile. "Oh, there you are, just dealing with a demanding client," she said, ending the call with a breezy, "Talk later." She took the picture from my hand, her touch light and dismissive. "You looked lost in thought," she added with a little laugh. And because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider, I let her. I smiled back and told myself I had misheard. This was the carefully constructed piece of our family, and for 18 years, I had been its primary architect. But every foundation has its breaking point. Mine arrived on the evening of my 18th birthday. For the first time in a long time, the day felt truly mine. My parents had thrown a beautiful party in our backyard. The air was warm, smelling of cut grass and cake. My friends were there. My family was celebrating me. And for a few precious hours, I wasn't just the quiet, responsible younger sister. I was the star. The moment came to cut the cake. It was a magnificent, three-tiered creation. Glowing under the string lights my father had hung, everyone gathered around, singing. I remember the look on my mother's face. Pure, uncomplicated joy. I picked up the silver knife, my heart swelling with a happiness so simple, it felt profound. As the knife touched the frosting, a blood-curdling shriek ripped through the cheerful melody. "Isabel," she clutched her chest, her eyes wide with a theatrical terror. I can't breathe," she gasped, her voice a hoarse whisper that commanded the attention of every single person in the yard. She staggered dramatically before collapsing onto the grass, her body curling into a fetal position. Chows erupted. My father shouted her name. My mother rushed to her side, her face pale with panic. The singing stopped. The party stopped. My birthday stopped. Someone called for an ambulance as the paramedics surrounded my sister, performing their checks. I stood frozen by the cake. The candles had begun to melt, their tiny flames flickering in the sudden, heavy silence. And through the haze of fear and confusion, a cold, clear thought surfaced, as sharp and chilling as a shard of ice. She isn't hurt. In that moment, watching the perfectly executed performance, I knew this wasn't a medical emergency. It was an assassination of a memory, and it was only the beginning. The aftermath of my 18th birthday party was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and I was its unwilling student. Isabel was released from the hospital a few hours later, the doctors finding absolutely nothing wrong with her, aside from what they vaguely termed mild dehydration. The official family narrative, however, was a very different story. It was a story of a brave, fragile Isabel, whose delicate health had unfortunately, tragically, collapsed at a moment of high emotion. My ruined party was never mentioned. It became an inconvenient detail, collateral damage in the grand drama of my sister's mysterious ailment. I tried to confront her once. A few days later, I found her in her room, looking perfectly healthy, scrolling through her phone. I kept my voice low, my words measured. "Isabel, we need to talk about my birthday." She looked up, her expression a careful blank slate. "What about it?" she asked, her tone laced with a feigned confusion. When I pressed, suggesting that her collapse had felt intentional, she deployed her arsenal with chilling precision. First came the tears, then the accusations. "I can't believe you would think that," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "I was in pain. I was terrified. And all you can think about is your stupid party. Why do you always have to be so selfish? So dramatic. My parents, drawn by the noise, entered the room just in time to see her tears. They immediately sided with her, wrapping their arms around their vulnerable daughter while giving me looks of deep disappointment. I was told to be more compassionate, more understanding. I was told to apologize, and I did. The apology tasted like ash in my mouth. For years, that was the pattern. A quiet submission to a narrative that I knew was false, all for the sake of a fragile peace. I went off to college and built a career and kept a careful, cordial distance. The incidents became less frequent, but the underlying dynamic remained. I would achieve something, and Isabel would find a way to subtly diminish it. I got a major promotion, and she would tell our parents she was worried I was working too hard and neglecting my health. The story of my fragility, my instability, there was a slow-acting poison. She dripped into the foundations of our family over the course of a decade. The next major fault line appeared, as they so often do, around a wedding. Her wedding. When Isabel announced her engagement to a successful and genuinely kind lawyer named David, I was truly happy for her. I saw it as a chance for a new beginning, a hope that marriage and maturity might sand down her sharp edges. I threw myself into the role of the supportive sister, the maid of honor. I helped her choose a venue, listened to endless debates about floral arrangements, and feigned excitement over guest lists. Then came the final act of betrayal, the one that would shatter the illusion for good. The wedding was a lavish affair at a country estate, a testament to Isabel's skill as an event planner and her fiancé's wealth. It was a perfect day. As I stood watching my sister at the altar, radiant in her designer gown, a strange thought occurred to me. This was it. This was the pinnacle of her life. The ultimate validation. Every eye was on her. She had won, and a cold, sinking feeling told me that it wasn't enough. For her to truly win, I had to lose. As she prepared to read her vows, her voice clear and triumphant, my own long-planned performance began. It was a cruel echo of my 18th birthday. A mirror held up to her own dark artistry. My breath hitched. My hand flew to my temple as if warding off a sudden, blinding headache. I swayed on my feet, my eyes fluttering shut. I didn't shriek or cry out. It was a silent, disparity collapse, a body simply giving up. I crumpled to the floor. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp from the guests. David, her fiancé, stopped his vows mid-sentence, his face etched with alarm. The carefully orchestrated perfection of the ceremony shattered into 1,000 pieces of raw, human concern. I had stolen her spotlight, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The true revelation, however, came later, after being rushed away by concerned family members and revived with a glass of water. I retreated to a quiet room to recover. My phone, which I had left behind, was brought to me, and on its screen was the evidence of my sister's true soul. It began with one message, then two, then a deluge, 73 messages in total. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one showed a flicker of concern. They were a torrent of pure, undiluted rage. A viper's nest of accusations. You ruined my day. You couldn't let me have one thing. You are a pathetic, attention-seeking child. I will never, ever forgive you for this. And then, the line that burned itself into my memory, the one that would become the catalyst for everything that followed. You should have just endured it and stayed standing so you didn't ruin my wedding. I sat there in the quiet, opulent room, the muffled sounds of the resumed celebration, a world away. I read the words over and over. each one a nail in the coffin of the sister I had tried to love. The pain wasn't a hot, angry flush. It was a cold, creeping numbness. It was the feeling of a surgeon confirming a terminal diagnosis. There was no hope left. In my hand, I held the proof that this was never about jealousy. It was about erasure. And I finally understood that if I didn't fight back, she would continue until there was nothing left of me. The girl who apologized for her ruined birthday party was gone forever. And in her place, a strategist was born. The hours that followed felt like suspended animation. The world outside the room, the music, the laughter. The clinking glasses was an echo from a life that was no longer mine. Inside, there was only the cold, the blue light of the phone screen, and the 73 messages that had redrawn the map of my entire existence. The pain was immense, but it was a strangely clarifying pain. It burned away all the excuses, all the hopeful delusions, all the years I had spent trying to find a version of my sister worth loving. All that remained was the stark, ugly truth. My first move was not born of anger, but of a cold, calculated strategy that seemed to rise from some dormant part of my soul. Me fingers, steady now, moved across the screen. I did not engage. I did not retaliate. I crafted a response designed to feed my sister's greatest weakness, her arrogance. I typed Isabel. I am so deeply sorry that my health issue cast a shadow on your perfect day. I hope you and David can still enjoy your honeymoon. Wishing you all the happiness. I sent it. It was a message of surrender. An act of feigned submission so complete that I knew she would believe it. She would read it, smirk, and dismiss me as the same weak, apologetic little sister she had always been able to control. She would go on her honeymoon believing she had won the war. She had no idea. I was just beginning to plan my first battle. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair by the window, watching the dawn creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gray and bruised purple. The sadness didn't disappear. In that moment, it simply crystallized into a single, unshakable purpose. The years of being told I was too sensitive, too emotional, too fragile, suddenly clicked into place. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a narrative, carefully constructed, piece by piece. The ruined birthday, the constant undermining of my achievements, her feigned concern for my mental health, it was all evidence in a case she had been building against me my entire life. The question was no longer if she was my enemy, but why her campaign was so methodical. My mind kept returning to David, her new husband, the man who had looked so alarmed when I fell. He was a lawyer, a man trained to see past performances and into the fine print. He had to have seen something. The thought of contacting him felt like a violation of some unspoken code, but the rules had changed. I was no longer playing the same game. With trembling hands, I found his number. I wrote and deleted a dozen drafts before finally sending a simple, direct message. David, this is Elena. I realize the timing is beyond inappropriate, and for that I apologize. But the messages Isabel sent me after the ceremony have raised some deeply disturbing questions. I keep thinking about a comment you once made to my parents about the prenuptial agreement. If you would be willing to speak with me, in the strictest confidence, I would be immensely grateful. He responded within the hour. We met 2 days later in a quiet, anonymous coffee shop halfway between our cities. He looked exhausted, the joy of a newlywed completely absent from his eyes. He confirmed he had seen the messages. I've never seen a display of such cruelty, he said, shaking his head. When I confronted her, she tried to convince me you had a history of this, of making everything about yourself. He then told me what I needed to know. Elena, in our prenup negotiations, she was fixated on one area, future inheritances, specifically yours. She tried to insert a clause that would grant her significant administrative power over any assets you might receive, citing your, and these were her words, history of emotional instability. It was the single most predatory legal maneuver I had ever witnessed. I struck it down immediately, but I never forgot it. His words were the key, unlocking a cascade of buried memories, the half-overheard phone call about arrangements, the old letter from a lawyer my parents had dismissed. It all pointed to one thing: money. That night, I drove to my parents' house. I told them I was looking for some old childhood photo albums. I went down into the basement, the air thick with the smell of dust and time. There, in a corner, he was a stack of old file boxes belonging to my grandmother, who had passed away 5 years prior. For hours, I sifted through old papers, tax returns, and letters, and then I found it, a thick to leather-bound folder with the name of a prestigious estate law firm embossed on the front. My hands shook as I opened it. The language was dense, full of legal jargon. But my work as a financial analyst had trained me for this. My eyes scanned the pages, and then they landed on the title, The Serenity Trust. It was a multi-million-dollar trust fund, established by my grandmother. My breath caught in my throat. I read on. My grandmother's loving words, reaching out from beyond the grave. Speaking of my steadfast character, my quiet wisdom, and my responsible soul. It was why she had named me, Elena, as the primary beneficiary and sole trustee, with the funds to be fully dispersed on my 35th birthday. And then I saw the final, damning page. It was a notarized addendum, a log of inquiries, and there it was, in black and white. An inquiry log just 3 months after my grandmother's funeral. From Isabel Vance, granddaughter, requesting a full copy of the trust terms. She had known, for 5 years, she had known the gaslighting, the sabotage, the carefully crafted narrative of my fragility. It wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was a cold, calculated, long-term strategy to have me declared mentally unfit to manage my own inheritance. It was attempted grand larceny disguised as family dysfunction. I closed the folder, and the leather cooled beneath my fingertips. The girl who cried over a ruined birthday was gone. The woman who held that folder in her hands knew exactly what she had to do. The trust was named Serenity. What a bitter, perfect irony. My path forward would bring anything but. The 2 weeks that followed my discovery in the basement were the quietest and most focused of my life. The rage and the grief did not vanish, but I compartmentalized them, storing them away like old files. My analyst's mind took over. My apartment, usually a haven of cozy blankets and fiction novels, transformed into a war room. The dining table disappeared under a sea of bank statements, old emails, and legal precedents. I created spreadsheets, color-coded and cross-referenced, tracing the flow of money from my parents' accounts to Isabel's for the past 10 years. A vacation here, a business loan there, a down payment for a car she couldn't afford. It formed a staggering mosaic of manipulation and entitlement, totaling over $150,000. All the while, I watched Isabel's honeymoon unfold on social media. There she was, smiling serenely on a white sand beach in the Maldives. Her new husband at her side. Each post, with its carefully curated caption about new beginnings and true happiness, it was a fresh twist of the knife. But now, it was also a data point. She was at the apex of her victory, drunk on her own success, and that made her predictable. She believed I was a non-entity, a problem that had been solved. She had no idea I was an analyst, and she was my new, all-consuming project. My first move was timed to perfection. I waited until the 9th day of her 14-day trip. I wanted her to be relaxed, complacent, and far from home. She would be sitting by an infinity pool, scrolling through her own perfect photos. When a notification would slide onto her screen, it wouldn't be a like or a comment. It would be an email, arriving with the sterile click of a closing deadbolt. The subject line was designed to be both innocuous and unnerving. Formal inquiry regarding interfamily financial transfers. The Serenity Trust. I could picture her perfectly, her brow furrowing in mild annoyance. She would open it, expecting some bureaucratic formality. The language inside was dense, polite, and utterly impersonal. It was a formal notice from the Trust legal team, stating that as part of a routine beneficiary review, a full accounting of all significant financial gifts or loans from our parents to their heirs over the past decade was required. It requested that she provide full documentation for her records within 30 business days. I knew she had no such documentation. They were never loans, they were acquisitions. She would read it, perhaps roll her eyes at the inconvenience, and dismiss it as a problem for later. But the email was only the first part of a two-pronged strike. The real mechanism was already in motion. The following morning, as I had predicted, my phone rang. It was Isabel. "Hey," she began, her voice a little too casual. "Weirdest thing. I just got this bizarre, super formal email from Grandma's lawyers. Something about an audit. Do you know what that's all about?" I took a sip of my morning coffee, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. "Good morning, Isabel. I hope you're having a wonderful honeymoon." My voice was calm, level, and utterly devoid of the warmth she was used to. "I've been getting my own financial affairs in order. The estate lawyers are simply performing their due diligence." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of ocean waves on her end of the line. "What does getting your affairs in order even mean?" she pressed, a hint of irritation in her voice. "It sounds like a formal audit." "It just means ensuring every asset is properly accounted for before any future distributions," I replied, using the kind of corporate language she detested. "You, of all people, should appreciate the importance of good planning. I have to go now. I have a meeting." And I hung up, leaving her with a dial tone and a disquieting sense of a shift in power. She wouldn't understand what had happened, but she would feel it. The ground beneath her feet was no longer stable. The final piece of my plan was reliant on her predictable arrogance. I knew that the legal notice, combined with my cold dismissal, would needle her. She would feel an impulse to reassert her dominance, to prove that she was still in control, that nothing had changed. And the easiest way for her to do that was to spend money she didn't have. The scene, as it was described to me later, was exactly as I had pictured. It was their last day. Isabel decided they needed a honeymoon souvenir and led David into a high-end luxury boutique. She selected a ridiculously expensive watch, a companion piece to the one she had bought with my rent money years ago. At the counter, she presented her credit card with a flourish, the supplementary card linked to our father's primary account. Her personal line of endless, unearned credit. The cashier, a young woman with a polite, professional smile, swiped the card. There was a moment of silence as the machine processed. The smile on the cashier's face tightened slightly. "I'm so sorry." "Ma'am," she said, her voice low. "It seems the card has been declined." Isabel's own smile faltered. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Try it again." The cashier obliged. "Declined." The machine chirped again, this time a little louder. A flush of hot, red humiliation crept up Isabel's neck. Other customers were beginning to notice. Flustered, she pulled out her phone to open her personal banking app, intending to transfer the funds herself. But as the app loaded, a stark, red banner flashed across the top of the screen. In bold, unforgiving letters, it read, "Account frozen pending financial review." The blood drained from her face. This was not a glitch. It was not a mistake. Her mind replayed the sterile language of the lawyer's email, the cold, detached tone of my voice on the phone. And in that moment of searing public embarrassment, she finally understood. This wasn't bureaucracy. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a meticulously planned, precisely executed, and devastatingly effective attack, and it had been launched by the one person she had written off as a permanent casualty in her victorious life. She stood there, frozen in the opulent boutique, the $20,000 watch feeling like a lead weight in her hand. As the world she had built on lies and manipulation began to shudder and crack around her, the return from the Maldives was not the triumphant homecoming Isabel had envisioned. The sun-kissed glow was replaced by a pallor of cold panic. Her world, once a playground, funded by an endless supply of credit and goodwill, had suddenly been reduced to the stark reality of a frozen bank account and a ticking legal clock. Her first instinct, honed by a lifetime of practice, was to run not to a lawyer, but to her primary, enablers our parents. She stormed into their house in a tempest of manufactured tears and righteous indignation. I wasn't there to witness it, but my mother's subsequent phone call painted a vivid picture. "I don't know what's gotten into your sister," my mother sobbed into the phone. Her voice laced with the familiar anxiety Isabel was so skilled at inducing. "She says you've frozen her accounts, that you're accusing her of stealing Elena. This has to stop. You're tearing this family apart." Isabel's performance, I'm sure, was worthy of an award. She would have framed my actions as a petty, vindictive tantrum, a jealous lashing out from the spurned little sister. She was the victim. I was the aggressor. It was the same script she had used for 34 years. But this time, I was not participating in the play. I let my mother finish, my own voice remaining calm and steady when I finally spoke. "Mom," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I love you, but this is no longer a simple family disagreement. This is a formal legal and financial matter concerning Grandma's estate. I have hired professionals to handle it, and they are doing their job. Any concerns Isabel has, she can, and should, direct to them. I will not be discussing the details with you or Dad over the phone." There was a stunned silence on the other end. She was expecting tears, arguments, a familiar, emotional battlefield. I had given her a corporate boardroom. I had refused to be manipulated. The conversation ended with my mother's confused and frustrated sighs. Isabel's oldest and most reliable weapon, emotional blackmail, had just misfired. This new reality sent Isabel into a deeper state of panic. The 30-day deadline to provide documentation was approaching. With her emotional appeals failing, she was forced to confront the fact that she had to produce evidence that simply did not exist. So, she decided to create it. It was a move born of equal parts desperation and breathtaking arrogance. I can picture her now, alone in her chic home office late at night, the glow of her monitor casting long shadows on the wall. She would be frantically searching online for loan agreement templates and business investment proposal examples. With the clumsy haste of an amateur, she began to construct her fiction. She fabricated proposals for startup businesses that were never started, drafted loan agreements for personal emergencies that were actually luxury vacations. She painstakingly backdated every document, her keystrokes a frantic tap dance against the looming deadline. Her final, most reckless act was the forgery. To account for the largest sum, a transfer of $25,000. She drafted a formal loan document between herself and our father. But a document like that needed a signature. Undeterred, she found an old birthday card from him, scanned his familiar, looping signature, and digitally pasted it onto the bottom of her fraudulent contract. In her mind, she was being clever, resourceful. She was a victim fighting back against an unjust attack. She believed no one would ever look closely enough to notice the slight pixelation around the edges, the unnatural perfection of the placement. She packaged her collection of lies into a neat digital folder and sent it to the trust's legal team with a defiant sense of relief. She had called my bluff, but she had fundamentally misjudged her opponent. I was not playing a game of emotional poker. I was executing a financial analysis. And the professionals I had hired were not sentimental family members, they were forensic accountants. Her package of lies didn't just raise red flags, it set off a 5-alarm fire. The mismatched fonts, the inconsistent dating, the generic template language, it was laughably transparent. The forged signature was the final, tout fatal error. The trust lawyers, with my express permission, forwarded the most egregious document, the forged loan agreement, to an independent handwriting expert. They also forwarded a copy to David, her estranged husband, for his professional legal opinion. The gears of a machine far larger and more impersonal than a family squabble began to turn. Isabel was feeling a flicker of her old confidence returning when the next email arrived. It wasn't from the family trust. The sender was the Cybercrime and Fraud Division of the local district attorney's office. The subject line was a death knell to the life she had known, notice of formal criminal investigation into suspected wire fraud and forgery. She had been trying to patch a hole in the dam, and in her panic, she had dynamited the entire structure. Her desperate attempt to cover a civil matter had birthed a criminal one. I imagine her staring at the screen, the words "criminal investigation" blurring before her eyes. The game had irrevocably changed. She was no longer just at risk of losing her inheritance. For the first time in her protected, privileged life, Isabel was facing the possibility of losing her freedom. A formal notice of a criminal investigation is not a whisper, it is a battering ram. It demolishes denial, shatters illusions, and leaves only the hard, ugly framework of reality behind. When news of the district attorney's inquiry reached my parents, the carefully constructed narrative that Isabel had spent a lifetime weaving finally began to unravel. It was my father who called me. The anger and confusion that had colored his voice for weeks were gone, replaced by a deep, somber gravity that chilled me to the bone. "Elena," he began, his voice heavy, labored. "We received a call from an investigator at the D.A. office. He asked me to verify my signature on a loan document for $25,000. A document your sister submitted." He paused, and I could hear his ragged breath on the other end of the line. I told him the truth. I told him I never signed any such thing. I never even saw it before. Another pause. This one longer. Heavier. "Now, you are going to tell me what is really going on. No more lawyers. No more evasions. I need the whole truth from you. Now." This was the moment the burden of proof shifted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say, "I told you so." I simply replied, "I will send you an email. Dad, it will have a single, password-protected link. The password is Grandma's middle name." I paused, then added, "The truth is all in there. When you're ready to see it, in that secure digital folder, I placed everything the full text of the Serenity Trust. The meticulously detailed audit of Isabel's 10-year financial drain, and scans of all 73 of her hateful text messages from the wedding. I had built my case, and now it was time for the jury of two. to deliberate, while the storm raged in my parents' home. And a different kind of collapse was happening in Isabel's professional life. Her entire career as a high-end event planner was built on a carefully polished image of success, taste, and, above all, trustworthiness. A criminal investigation is a poison from which such a reputation rarely recovers. Her downfall was swift and brutal. The final blow came from her most prestigious client, the annual Benefactors Gala for the city's largest children's hospital, an event she had overseen for 5 consecutive years. An emergency board meeting was called. I imagine Isabel walking into that boardroom, her professional smile stretched taut across her face, trying to project an aura of calm control. The board chair, a formidable woman in her 60s, did not mince words. "Isabel," she began, her eyes fixed on the laptop in front of her. "We've been made aware through our legal counsel of a pending criminal investigation into matters of fraud and forgery. As you know, our organization's reputation is paramount." The chair looked up, her gaze cold and unwavering. "Therefore, the board has voted unanimously. We are invoking the morality clause in your contract and terminating our agreement, effective immediately. Humiliation is a powerful acid. To be dismissed so clinically, so publicly, was a professional execution. She had lost more than a client. She had lost her identity as the city's golden girl. She was now a liability. At home, the verdict was in. My father, a man whose entire moral compass was built on the principles of honesty and hard work, had spent 2 days locked in his study with the contents of my email. My mother, I later learned, had tried to defend Isabel, weaving excuses about stress and sibling rivalry. But there is no excuse for forgery. There is no compassionate explanation for the venom in those text messages. The final confrontation took place in the living room where we had celebrated so many Christmases. Isabel was there, summoned by our parents, likely expecting them to present a united front to announce how they would fix this for her, as they always had. Instead, my father stood before her, his face like granite. In his hand, he held a printed copy of the fraudulent loan agreement. "Did you do this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did you take a card I sent you for your birthday and steal my name to commit a crime?" Cornered, with no more lies to tell, Isabel finally broke, but it was not a breakdown of remorse. It was a volcanic eruption of pure, narcissistic rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. "Yes," she shrieked, her face contorted in a mask of ugly fury. "I did it, and I would do it again. You never saw me. It was always her Saint Elena. The quiet one. The responsible one. Grandma's favorite. That trust was my birthright. It was my due for having to live in her shadow my entire life. You owe me that money for what you put me through." My father didn't flinch. He just stood there, watching this stranger who was his daughter. And in his eyes, I was told, was a look of profound and devastating clarity. He was finally seeing the real Isabel, not the curated performance he had chosen to believe in for 34 years. He waited until her screaming subsided into ragged sobs. And then he delivered his judgment. We didn't love her more. "Isabel," he said, his voice cracking with a pain that was awful to hear. "We failed her. We failed her every single time we protected you from the consequences of your own actions." He placed the forged document on the coffee table. "We are done. We cannot protect you from this. We cannot lie for you. We cannot fix this for you." He turned away from her. "A final?" Heartbreaking. Dismissal. "You are on your own." My mother, for the first time, did not rush to comfort her. She stood by my father, her face a mess of tears and dawning horror. And in that moment, Isabel was truly utterly alone, abandoned by the two people who had served as her willing accomplices and human shields her entire life. Her allies had fallen, leaving her completely exposed to the storm she had created. In the desolate landscape of Isabel's new reality, stripped of her allies and facing the cold machinery of the law, a single, desperate instinct remained self-preservation. She was a cornered animal, and it was then that I extended a hand. It was not a hand of mercy, but the final, crucial component of a carefully constructed trap. My lawyer contacted hers with an offer. It was framed as an opportunity for reconciliation, a path to avoid the ugliest of outcomes. The terms were simple. Isabel was to attend a final, formal mediation at the law firm. There, in front of the family, she would make a full, recorded confession of her actions, from the financial manipulation to the forgery. In return, she would be required to sign a legally binding document, relinquishing any and all future claims to the Serenity Trust and any part of our parents' estate. If she agreed to these terms, I would submit a formal victim impact statement to the district attorney's office, attesting that this was a family matter that had been resolved internally and recommending the utmost leniency to her lawyers. It sounded like a generous off-ramp. To Isabel, it must have sounded like a miracle, a chance to avoid jail time, to perhaps, one day, slither her way back into our parents' good graces. It was a sliver of hope, and she clung to it with the desperation of a drowning woman. She agreed immediately. The day before the scheduled mediation, she made her final, predictable move. She called our mother. I was there when the call came. Sitting in my parents' quiet kitchen, I had prepared them for this, explaining that Isabel's final act would be an attempt to fracture their resolve. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad, newfound strength, and nodded. She answered the phone and put it on speaker. Placing it on the table between us, my own phone was already on, its recording app silently active. Isabel's voice was a broken, "Despérate," sob. "Mom," she cried, the performance as flawless as ever. "Mom, you have to help me. I'm so scared. I know I made mistakes. Terribly mistakes. But I was just so scared of losing you and Dad. I saw how much you worried about Elena. And I thought if I could just be more successful, more in control, I could take care of everyone. I never meant for it to become criminal. You know, I would never really hurt anyone. You have to believe me. Mom, you have to tell them that." It was a masterful blend of confession and excuse-making. An admission of fact wrapped in a denial of intent. It was the same tactic she had used her entire life. And for the first time, it had no effect. My mother listened, her face a mask of sorrow. "Isabel," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The time for stories is over. Tomorrow, you just have to tell the truth." She ended the call, leaving Isabel's sobs hanging in the silent kitchen air. I stopped the recording. I now had the final piece of evidence. I needed a confession, not of remorse, but of narcissism. The boardroom at the law firm was a sterile, intimidating space of glass and polished mahogany. Isabel arrived first, with her lawyer. She looked haggard, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. She was expecting a tense, emotional family meeting. What she walked into was an execution. One by one, the rest of us filed in. First, me, then our parents, their faces grim and resolute. Then, to Isabel's visible shock, David, her now ex-husband, who took a seat next to my lawyer. Finally, a court stenographer sat down at a small desk in the corner, her presence turning the mediation into a formal deposition. Isabel's face went from hopeful to ashen. This was not a reconciliation. It was an arraignment. Milavier, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, began. She did not speak of forgiveness or family. She spoke of evidence. With the cold precision of a surgeon, she began to lay out the entire, sordid history of Isabel's campaign against me. On a large screen at the end of the boardroom, a presentation began. First, the financial audit, a damning spreadsheet detailing the $150,000, itemized and dated. Next, a slide showing the forged loan document side by side with the forensic expert's sworn affidavit declaring it a crude and obvious fabrication. Then, the 73 text messages appeared on screen, their venomous words filling the silent room. With each slide, Isabel seemed to shrink in her chair. Finally, Miss Albright looked toward me. And now, a final piece of evidence, recorded less than 24 hours ago. She pressed a key, and the sound of Isabel's sobbing, desperate phone call to our mother filled the boardroom. Her own voice, pleading, lying, and excusing, became the closing argument against her. When the recording clicked off, the silence was absolute. There was nowhere left for her to hide. I looked at my sister, truly looked at her, for the first time without a filter of hope or obligation, and I finally spoke. My voice was not triumphant. It was not angry. It was the calm, quiet voice of a conclusion being reached. This was never about the money. Isabel, I said, it was about the truth. For your entire life, you have used my love for our family and my desire for peace as a weapon against me. I leaned forward slightly, making sure she could see that there was no hatred in my eyes, only a profound and final certainty. The game is over. You didn't lose today. You lost years ago. The moment you decided that my silence meant I was weak. Ms. Albright slid a thick document across the polished table. This is your confession and your permanent, irrevocable relinquishment of any claim, present or future, to any Vance family assets, she stated. Sign it. Isabel's lawyer whispered frantically to her. But she wasn't listening. She was staring at me. The deal? She croaked, her voice barely audible. The D. A. There is no deal. Ms. Albright said flatly. A full copy of this presentation, including the recording you just heard, was delivered to the district attorney's office this morning. This document is not a negotiation. It is simply a formality. The finality of it settled over the room. There was no escape, no last-minute trick, only the cold, hard weight of a bill that had finally come due. She looked at our father's stony face, our mother's tears, David's pitying gaze, and my calm resolve. She saw no allies, no escape routes, only the end of the line. Her hand, shaking, reached for the pen. Checkmate. The signing of the confession was not a moment of triumph. There was no cathartic release, no swell of victorious music. There was only the quiet scratch of a pen on paper in a room thick with the ghosts of what could have been. When it was done, Isabel didn't look at any of us. She simply stood up, her shoulders slumped, and walked out of the room, leaving the architecture of our family in ruins behind her. We did not watch her go. We each sat with our own piece of the wreckage. The year that followed was a year of quiet reconstruction. I sold my old apartment, a place that held too many memories of late-night phone calls and anxious worry. I used a portion of the trust, my grandmother's legacy of serenity, to establish a charitable foundation in her name. It focuses on providing financial literacy education for young women who have aged out of the foster care system, women who, like me, had to learn to be their own safe harbor. My new office is a bright, airy space overlooking a small city park. Sometimes, in between reviewing grant proposals and mentoring sessions, I find myself looking out the window, watching the seasons change. The tightness that used to live permanently in my chest is gone. It has been replaced by a quiet, centered strength. I have learned to turn the poison of my past into medicine for someone else's future. It is a profound and satisfying alchemy. As for Isabel, the law is an impersonal force. Faced with an insurmountable mountain of evidence, she accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to felony fraud and served 6 months in a low-security correctional facility. She is now halfway through a 5-year probation period. I have heard, through a distant family acquaintance, that she is working as an administrative assistant for a logistics company on the other side of the state. We have not spoken a single word since that day in the boardroom. I do not hate her. I do not wish her ill. I simply do not think of her at all. She has been excised from my life. A necessary amputation to save the whole. The relationship with my parents has been the most complex part of the recovery. It is a delicate, fragile thing, being rebuilt piece by painful piece on a new foundation of brutal honesty. The old dynamic of enabler, victim, and antagonist is gone, and we are all still learning how to exist without it. The phone calls are less frequent, but more meaningful. The conversations are cautious, but for the first time, they are real. Last week, my mother called, her voice, once so certain, now carried a permanent note of tentativeness. "Elena," she said, after a few moments of small talk, "I was just calling to see how you are." I looked out my window at the green leaves of the oak tree in the park. "I'm doing well, Mom," I said, and the words were true. The foundation is sponsoring its first scholarship recipient this fall. I'm really proud of that. There was a long pause on her end, and I could hear the unspoken weight of what she wanted to ask. "That's wonderful." "Dear," she finally said, and her voice fragile. "Your father and we were hoping. We were wondering if you might like to come for dinner soon. Just the 3 of us." The invitation hung in the air. A bridge offered across a vast canyon. The old Elena would have said yes instantly. Eager to soothe, to please, to rebuild, but the old Elena was gone. I thought for a moment before I answered. Not out of anger, but out of respect for the new boundaries I had fought so hard to build. "I appreciate that." "Mom, I really do." I took a breath, but maybe not just yet. I think I still need a little more time." It was not a rejection, but it was not an acceptance. It was the truth. And for the first time, she seemed to understand. "Okay, dear," she said softly. "We understand. We'll be here when you're ready." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. There was no guilt, only a quiet sense of peace. The scar from Isabel's betrayal would always be a part of me, a reminder of the fault line that split my world in 2. But it no longer ached. It was a part of my story, not the end of it. I had survived the storm, and in the quiet aftermath, I had finally found my own serenity. It wasn't the absence of conflict or the illusion of a perfect family. It was the strength to stand firm in my own truth, and the courage to build a new dawn on my own terms. The story of Elena and Isabel is a deeply painful reminder that sometimes the deepest betrayals come from within the very walls we believe are meant to protect us. The primary lesson here is not one of vengeance, but one of self-preservation. It teaches us that trust once shattered by a loved one, can create wounds that may never fully heal in the same way. True strength, as Elena discovered, isn't always found in loud confrontations, but in the quiet, calculated resolve to reclaim your own truth and let the consequences of others' actions speak for themselves. We feel a profound empathy for anyone who has had to face the agonizing choice between family loyalty and their own well-being. If this story resonates with you, please know that setting boundaries to protect your mental peace and self-respect is not an act of selfishness. It is a necessary and courageous act of survival. You are not responsible for the actions of others, but you are responsible for protecting your own serenity. This brings us to a difficult question. What would you do if you were in Elena's position? Where do you draw the line between forgiveness and enabling toxic behavior within a family? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. 2 below. Your story might be the one someone else needs to read.